Right, hi, morning everyone, online as well. So my name is Samuel Cliff and I'm an ethical trading manager. I know we've not got many on the floor right now, but has anyone heard of ethical trading before? Just a show of hands if you have. We've got a few, fantastic. And responsible sourcing, show of hands, yep, fantastic. And have any of you heard of SEDEX? We've got a nod or two, fantastic. So I've been working ethical trade for about 12 years now, and I've been a member director of SEDEX for 3 of those. So I'm going to talk to you today about how do you know who you're doing business with and how SEDEX can help you in that process. So who is SEDEX? SEDEX is a membership organization which is set up for responsible businesses who are committed to improving working conditions in global supply chains. It provides business insights and solutions to help you manage risk and improve ethical standards within your supply chain. With more than 16 years of expertise and experience and counting, it is the world's largest ethical trading platform. Ethical data platform is what I should say. It provides tools for you to assess business practices for supply chain risks. There are learning modules, there are training courses, and insights to support you on your journey. There's a global reach of 33 million people and counting in 180 countries. So what is responsible sourcing? Good to know that some of you know the term. It's very interchangeable with ethical trading and sustainability. Lots of buzzwords these days. But responsible sourcing can be seen as proactively sourcing and procuring products and services ethically and sustainably throughout each tier of the supply chain. So we're talking about things like here, safe working conditions, ensuring that living wages are paid, that there's free choice of employment, there's no use of child labor, and no form of discrimination. But it also includes managing environmental impacts. The next slide is going to be a video, and it's going to give you a much stronger understanding from more people in the industry about what responsible sourcing is, so you can understand it in more context. And hopefully this will play okay. If not, I'll leave my friend Brian.
Responsible sourcing for us is knowing where our products are made and under what conditions, and then being able to handle whatever we do find in our supply chain.
I think that responsible sourcing is put within a context of sustainability, meeting the needs of today while enhancing the ability for future generations to meet the needs in the future.
Why? Because it's in the interests of the company for the long term. It's in the interest of its stakeholders for the long term, but it's also fundamental to the success of the broader economic, social, and environmental landscape in which everybody's operating.
And it's not altruism. It's a matter of just protecting the products that we're making as well and protecting the workers engaged in this. So we need quality products to come through to us. We need to make sure that we have stability in our supply.
It's both a challenge and quite an exciting feature of the world we live in, that supply chains for products for high street vendors, for retailers, are enormous.
At Diageo, we talk about having 35,000 suppliers, probably about 70,000 third parties, spread across over 100 companies around the world. I think when that actually is multiplied by the number of sub-suppliers in that supply chain, then you get into hundreds of thousands.
And then if you look at the areas of Asia that are involved, if you like, as the workshops of the world supplying to us, there are literally tens and tens of millions of people that are involved in this.
In most companies, the purchasing team, their sole mandate is cost-oriented, and it's about meeting delivery times and quality targets and cost targets with very little consideration of how they get there.
Historically, one can look at the shareholder approach as being very short-term, very driven by financial returns, and pretty much little else. Whereas the stakeholder requirement or concern is generally considered to be much broader, considers many more impacts, and generally on a longer time scale. So the tension between the two is obvious.
Historically, responsible sourcing was kind of an add-on to the mainstream commercial or procurement process. And you had responsible sourcing teams that sometimes existed independently of the buyers, let's say.
So we've heard about sweatshop labour across really many of the big brands since the early 90s when this became to be a big story for the press. And those were the things that we were able to focus on, ask if this could be cleaned up and whether there was a practical solution to cleaning these up. So from becoming an activist story, this became very much focused about supply chain.
But I think what you're seeing now for business leaders is this is actually a key strategy.
And I think we are seeing a trend where it's much more integrated to the business and it cuts across human resources,
The risk management team,
procurement,
your branding, your marketing teams.
public relations,
Legal could again also be involved.
as well as perhaps your foundation or social investment team.
Everyone within an organisation, I think, has a role to play in responsible sourcing. So whether you're the CEO, the chairman, a project manager on a certain area, you all have an understanding about how you expect your company to operate and what you expect from your suppliers.
From a Marks & Spencer's perspective, we've made responsible sourcing how we do business. So right from the board level, who are involved in our How We Do Business committee that's chaired by the CEO, through to everybody having this written into their objectives.
So for us, our CEO very much espouses and leads the work we do in terms of our 20 by 20 and our sustainability plan. But then all of his direct reports, our trading board, our operating boards, our CR committee, at all of those levels within the business, it's viewed as extremely important, all the way down to kind of store level and to our colleagues working in store. It really has to be bought into by everyone within the business if it's going to work effectively.
So what we're seeing with leading companies is that they're training people across the business. They're exposing those in the design office, in the procurement section, to understanding ethical impacts, understanding their decisions' impact on ethical standards.
What we're not seeing is that leaders are in a particular sector. They're not. Actually, across the world, we're seeing natural leaders pop up. And they're popping up because they have looked at the future and they've spotted the opportunity.
All the things we as a society think are important to feed the world, to preserve biodiversity, to ensure that we use less fossil fuels and emit less greenhouse gas emissions, they coincide with the supply chain security of those big companies. So there is no alternative, and this is the straight and quite clear way forward.
So I think that video really kind of strengthens what the meaning is of responsible sourcing. I don't know what businesses you all operate in. I used to work for John Lewis and Waitrose, and now for a fruit supplier, Worldwide Fruit. And I just want to talk through why I think it's important for you to gain visibility of your supply chain. So as a fruit supplier to UK supermarkets, ethical supply chain management has become so crucial in how we do business. You heard in that video about people talking about how we do business becoming an integrated part of businesses, and that's very much who we are today. It was once just an expectation, though, and businesses like mine chose whether they wanted to engage in due diligence or not bother with those processes. But today, for my company, it is a requirement to do business. And while helping improve lives, we also benefit from strengthening our brand image. And I really want to make a point on brand image, because it's really easy to lose your brand image, that damage, but it takes a while to build it back. And it wouldn't be fair for me to name companies, but you may know of companies globally that have had human rights issues, whether it's sweatshop labor, child labor, or beyond. So, those front page headlines, they hit very quickly, be it social media, be it more traditional forms of media. But the apologies are very slow, or the real information coming behind it, or the proactive remediation and sorting the solutions out. That's a very slow apology or a very slow process. So it's really important, I believe, for you to get visibility of your supply chain and understand your risks. My supply chain at Worldwide Fruit is vast, it's complex, and it's varied. It spans 44 countries from South America, North America, Europe, Northern Africa, Southern Africa, and Australasia. In order to understand the more than 7,000 entities in that supply chain, I need to gain an insight. And I do this by gaining an insight through SEDEX, by having all that information in one place. It allows me to have it at my fingertips. So it's my main risk management and data insight platform in SEDEX. I can view information, I can understand the risks and current ethical credentials of the packing facilities, the farms, and the smaller growers, often referred to as smallholders in my supply chain. And that was the same one as at John Lewis and Waitrose. I had that oversight of the supply chain by onboarding supplier sites into the SEDEX platform. This next video, it's a modern slavery awareness animation video. Modern slavery is a horrific crime, but before I play the short 2-minute animation video, just wanted a raise of hands if you've heard of the term modern slavery. Yeah, so a good proportion of people. We created this animation video so it would cut across language barriers globally. And it takes a second to load, so don't think it's not going to play, it will. And if it won't, Brian will be on this. There we go. So a really good video. Not exactly a mood lifter, but modern slavery is a real issue globally in supply chains, and it's a thing that we fear most as brands, but for families all over the world that have got members of their family working in places, modern slavery is the worst forms of crime that it's just awful. And we created this video to really raise the issue because it's really in the depths of your supply chain, and it is a crime. So ultimately, criminals are good at hiding their crime. So back to SEDEX and using SEDEX tools. I think it's still just on the screen, yep. Due diligence. I'm not sure if this is a term many of you have heard of much, but if you just raise a hand if you've heard of the word due diligence. Yeah, fantastic. It's often a term used in things like technical, so product specifications, etc. But in the context of ethical trading and responsible sourcing, it's about companies putting processes in place to assess, identify, prevent and mitigate and monitor human rights for the impacts that could be related directly to your business operations. So it could be, for example, you're putting in crazy stress at Christmas time or leading up to Christmas to get orders in, and the factory may not be being very transparent of how many orders they're already doing, which then has knock-on effects in that factory or farms or wherever it might be of your supply chain. And the knock-on effect is the workers, obviously, working longer hours. Then you have childcare issues. Their life can get really jiggled around. But of course, many people are very, well, not all are desperate for work, but obviously work is important to people. So the impacts that we have as businesses is important. So how we forecast, how we plan, all of these impacts can create worker welfare issues. And SEDEX can help you by mapping that supply chain and helping to create that transparency for the more that you get on that SEDEX platform, or otherwise you might be on another platform or hold things internally on spreadsheets and find out your information in a different way. But continuous improvement, it's a buzzword, it's a real common word in sustainability. And I really just sort of urge you to think about what is now and what could be going forward in terms of how it could be improved. And SEDEX provides you tools to do such things. So steps 1 to 4, assess actual and potential human rights and environmental risks. Now the actual will be things like when you've had a SMETA audit, which covers worker welfare and environmental issues as well. So there'll be actual risks that are being exposed and found that can be worked on in continuous improvement. But the potential ones, I think this is where SEDEX comes into its own. The information on the platform about suppliers through the SAQ questionnaires, historic audits, and even regional and international standards and sector issues are combined into how they build their algorithms so they can show you potential human risks for different sites you may be working with. Number 2, identify responsibility and actions. That's about understanding who is responsible for resolving these issues through actions. So if you know about the issue, and it could be related to how you're working with them, lots of pressure to get orders done, or very small orders and not helping them be sustainable, or long payment terms, whatever it might be, you can be part of that responsible journey in helping actions improve. Prevent and mitigate risk and provide remedy to those affected. So preventing and mitigating risk is about trying to understand those risks before they happen, and then remedy to those, it's about righting any wrongs found. Then, of course, step 4, that's whole monitor, review, report, and improve. But to give some context of that in action, ethical trading in action, these are kind of 4 key steps, and if you want to take photos, by all means do. These are 4 builds I would encourage you to look at. So if you use SEDEX, or want to use SEDEX, fantastic, because transparency through SEDEX is much easier by onboarding your suppliers onto the platform and then asking them to grant your SEDEX-registered company access to the information they submit and upload. You've also got aligned supply chain standards to customer terms of trading, or your own terms of trading, or your own principles of who you want to be and how you want to set your stall out for your own value proposition. Things like this can include ethical auditing, SAQ questionnaire completion. It's a very long questionnaire. It covers worker welfare and environmental impacts. Lots of questions that suppliers go through. And the great thing is you can actually analyze those answers with SEDEX by paying for the services to do that. Or if you've got some whiz kids, I shouldn't say whiz kids, some people who are great at data management in your company that can actually work through the trending. Lots of binary answers, yes and no's, and there's lots of multiple choice, as well as lots of context answers as well. And then worker representation, just a show of hands if anyone, I'm not going to ask you what it means, but if anyone knows what worker representation is. So it's things like representation via trade unions or worker committees on site. It's a real growing trend for the last 5 to 10 years, where retailers in the UK in particular, as well as America and parts of Europe, are trying to encourage and influence the supply chain to make sure workers have a voice so they can report good and bad practice at their workplace. Then point 3, run risk assessments and status reports across your supply chain. So you can start identifying high, medium, and low risk sites, not just high, medium, low risk countries, but you can actually delve into how that relates to your individual sites because of the information you can harness on SEDEX. And of course, you can then carry out audit non-compliance management by being able to review and see the performance of suppliers in your supply chain through ethical audits. And then I mentioned before about analyzing SAQs. But you can also delve deeper using SEDEX Radar. They have machine learning, and they have some great algorithms within their teams where they can explore advanced data insights and actually help predict modern slavery indicators. So you saw the animation video a bit earlier. You can actually have tools to predict where modern slavery in your supply chain may be more prevalent. So it's really good insights. It helps you prioritize where you either build your awareness of modern slavery, for example, or actually build your risk assessments and delve into more information. And then environmental risk analysis. This is a really good link to today's real buzz trend of sustainability, because you can actually build a much bigger picture of your global supply chain for the environmental standards. Looking at water risk tables and beyond, you can get a real idea, sector by sector, country by country, what it looks like. And you can also do country comparisons or even supplier comparisons to see what are the ethical credentials and environmental credentials that you can see in the SEDEX platform. And there's many more things as well. So, okay, some of my concluding slides. So, what to look for when working with a new supplier? First, you've got to really ask yourself, what do you already know about your supplier? And then define what you don't know. In the absence of knowledge, you could argue that it becomes a noted risk by default because you're not aware of good practice or not good practice. Are they already a SEDEX member, for example? If not, can you get them to become a SEDEX member? And would you yourselves be interested in becoming a SEDEX member? Point 3, when we're looking at worker welfare and understanding more, ask them how they can demonstrate that their workforce is treated well. Assess what they share with you. Is it enough, or is it simply smiling faces and clean workspaces? That's the typical response you get when people are very new to demonstrating to their buyers what workplace practice looks like. It's generally smiley faces, clean workspaces. Yeah, we're great. And then get them to walk and talk you through the journey of workers employed at their sites, where they work, where they have lunch, are there benefits given, do they provide living accommodation, do they provide transport? If they do, ask them to see it, see pictures of it, virtually get them to walk through the process, and when you can travel, look at those areas you might not look at before. But ultimately, it's your responsibility as a buyer to consider if you've done enough to better understand the suppliers you use or plan to use. You cannot run their businesses for them, that's obvious, but you can add a due diligence layer and ask the questions and review the information. When I visit suppliers, be it in person or more recently virtually, of course, I try and imagine if I would be happy to work there. When you make the supplier review more personal, the questions flow, and before you know it, the picture builds. And you better understand the life of a worker at the site, and your moral compass kicks in. A good way to look at it, I spoke to a buyer many years ago at a business I wasn't working with, but at a conference. And he said to me, but I can't imagine, Sam, working at this site because I've done university and I've got to where I am. I'm never going to work in a site like that, so how can I make it relate? That buyer had children who were actually old enough to work. Children to him, obviously, not in the context of being adults. They were over 18. And I said, well, imagine them working there. And it changed his mindset. It's trying to have perspective of supply sites that you're going to work with or you are working with. Make it personal, and then you'll imagine if it's a good place to work or not. Before I play this media expose, it's a short clip from a longer clip. This was back in 2015, October. The company I work for, this was a part in our supply chain where there was a Channel 4 media exposure. And when I was talking about brand company damage, this really, really didn't help at all. Hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of business was rerouted through other businesses, and it took a long while to go through that journey and get this site to what is now a leading site in ethical standards and accommodation, as well as transport. So it went from not good to very good. But I'll play the video, it's only 1 minute.
This is how fresh fruit gets to your table. Do you know what supermarkets you're packing for?
We're packing for Sainsbury, White Rose, Marks & Spencer, Aldi sometimes.
An investigation by this programme reveals intimidating behaviour by managers.
If you don't want to work, I'm going to send this whole team home, okay? And I'm going to get another people in.
And the appalling conditions that predominantly Eastern European workers say they have to live in to pick and pack the fruit destined for our supermarkets.
Știi să leșin. A hoit.
La ghetto.
La ghetto.
Practic, caravana, când am intrat, erau cum intri într-un ghetto.
And this isn't some far-flung outpost. It's happening right here in this country.
În 2 săptămâni de zile n-am avut curaj să spun ceva acasă despre condițiile de.
So that's a short clip. The key point I want to make here is it's a media expose. It came out of the blue. The site was given a week's notice that it was going to be airing this on TV and nothing they can do. They, of course, had the opportunity to go on the news themselves, which I wouldn't recommend because if you've ever seen people grilled, if it's politics or more, you don't often get a word in edgeways. But the key thing here is, whether this story was sensationalized or not, the brand damage was hit, and it was all about repairing after that. This was October 2015, and I really would say it wasn't until about mid-2017 that things really turned full circle in terms of it being a leading supplier in context of what happened in that media story. But we supply all the major UK retailers, and I certainly wouldn't share how they reacted, personally how they reacted, but they did react differently. So don't ever expect your buyers, or even your customers if you're going B2C, to react differently. We heard in the presentation earlier this morning, if you were here, that information travels so fast these days, and then we all know that. And I think it's about being prepared for things like this. It's about how you react, because sometimes you can't prevent it and mitigate it. Sometimes you don't have the resources to get across your supply chain. But doing something to try and understand more is the key here. And being prepared to work for your buyers, because they won't all act the same. Some will act very supportively, others may not. Just be prepared for that. Okay, last 2 slides. So how can SEDEX help? They can help you map your supply chain and create transparency. They can help you engage, collect, and store data about your suppliers and your own sites, if you have pack sites or farms, whatever it may be. They're there to assess the ethical and social performance of your suppliers. They're there to identify, track, and understand the risks related to your supply chain. They have great reports and analysis to help you make better informed decisions, saving you time and resource. For me, I talked about 7,000 entities. I couldn't do that in a load of spreadsheets myself. Meet compliance and legislative requirements. I talked about the Modern Slavery Act earlier. Any business with a turnover of £36 million or more has to report on it yearly and have a point on their website as well. Build knowledge and awareness, learn how to remedy ethical issues. There are lots of support teams within SEDEX, and your account manager would be your key route to unlocking those things. And then, of course, manage business reputation and build a resilient supply chain. I've talked about brand image a lot, and I really can't stress that. The reason why people like me, an ethical trading professional, is employed is to build brand reputation. Of course, my heartstrings is about improving workers' lives, and that's what companies buy into. But protecting our brand image and strengthening it is a real key reality. Any questions? If not, I feel like my friend James is going to have one.
James, have you got a question? No.
But I encourage you to get in contact with SEDEX, or if not, find me on LinkedIn and ask questions if you have. But just go eyes wide open in your supply chain and just be really aware about your brand and how you want to strengthen that.
Got a mic.
Sorry. Obviously, the transparency. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we deal with a lot of agents in the Far East. Obviously, the transparency of trying to know what factories they're dealing with becomes another problem in itself. Then, like, you got any tips or?
So just bring the microphone a little bit closer.
Sorry, yeah. But so basically, we deal with a lot of agents. They keep their factories quite close to their chest, understandably, because they don't want us to go direct. Have you got any tips to sort of how to approach that?
Yeah, so you've got multi-agent layers within reaching China, places like that. It's a difficulty I've experienced before when I used to work for John Lewis, and presumably with different suppliers, you've got different influence in terms of your buying power. You need to consider who they are supplying, what markets they're already supplying. If they're used to supplying the UK market, and you have that level of transparency with them, sometimes they're obviously not going to say who they're supplying. But if you're working with ones that are used to the UK market, they're going to be used to these questions and this level of diligence. And if they are trying to pull the wool over your eyes and not sharing that information, is the chance if they're supplying key retailers, they're already doing it. So really, really kind of push that point. But when you've got multi-agents on board, you really, really need to look at what it is they can offer you. Okay? You're not going to go through war and peace of information straight away, but you do need to get them to be transparent from one agent to the next. So if they can't disclose the name of the factory, which isn't good practice, if they can't, what else can they share? Could they share a SMETA report or another ethical audit and omit the name? Well, that's not ideal at all, but it's stuff you can hold them accountable to. If this is what they're giving you and don't do it over the phone. Make sure you've got your process within emails and you've got documentation and they're committing to it. I would really encourage you to have meeting minutes as well, because ultimately it's about trust as well. You can't run their business for them, that's obvious. But you need to get kind of a trust piece in place for them to open up that dialogue. And if they're being really wishy-washy and really kind of just glazing over it, they're the warning signs right there. The Far East is so used to this level of diligence from the UK, and it's building in America and beyond. So if they're really skirting from the issue, that to me would be alarm bells. And if you've got multi-agents, ask them how they can demonstrate it back. And if they just say to you, look, we can't share the name, fine. What are you committed to sharing about those sites that you can have a proper audit trail and some meetings with minutes that they would declare that it's coming from this region, this type of factory, hopefully the name of the factory, because otherwise they're leading up a garden path and not really being transparent. And that's alarm bells. Hopefully that was helpful.
We've got another question at the back.
Hope this is a sensible one, James.
It's a sensible question. It's nice to have this service obviously available to people who want the source in the right way. But say you invested in a business that perhaps wasn't doing things correctly, to bring them up to the standard that you wanted, and to give the support and the supply chain the right sort of processing. Would you be seen to be contributing to the problem, or is it a solution to override the problem?
So contributing to the problem of worker welfare?
Yeah, so say if we were sourcing from a place in India or somewhere like that, and you weren't sure that everybody was to the standard that we would see as ethically sourced,
yeah,
then if we invested in that to make sure the right procedures and processes were in place to make sure that that was the case, to bring it up to the level that we could guarantee it was, we could be perhaps seen as sourcing from an area that wasn't to standard originally, and it could be contributing to the problem.
Yeah, so, I mean, is this working? If you've got an opportunity to invest in a part of the supply chain that isn't strong on ethical credentials, I guess it can go two ways. One is, for example, Mexico is a good example in our current supply chain with organic avocados. Mexico is renowned for drug cartels and things like that, and there's a real nervousness with UK retailers about taking product from there. It doesn't mean those individual suppliers in that country, be it India, be it Mexico, are bad, but actually if you invest in that supply chain and look at how they can improve their processes and work hand in hand with them, you can take it from one point to a much better point. So that can be seen as a really positive value-adding exercise, because you need that source, whether it's India, whether it's Mexico, and as your sustainable business, you need to consider, is that part of your future? Can you help bring them along? Because you can soon turn the page in terms of positivity by demonstrating what has changed. And we can't ignore how cheap things are from certain countries. And if it's not in China, it'll move to India, and then when those places get too expensive, it'll probably move back to Africa. It'll keep rotating around. So the problem does move around. So it's about how you look at your long-term sustainability credentials and what you're willing to invest in. If you invest all this time in it and you get a negative perception that why are you wasting your time there, I guarantee if you're improving people's lives and can show the value proposition, it's not wasting time. It might be changing the hearts and minds of the buyers and really, dare I say, educating them in the process, because ultimately you and your suppliers will know more about the problem or the issues that you've resolved or helping to resolve than they will. I can guarantee you that.
One big more round of applause for Samuel, please.
Thank you.